The most infamous serial killer in South African history was caught, convicted, and imprisoned, yet 21 of his victims remain officially unsolved. Cape Town, the late 1980s. A city of devastating beauty built on the fault lines of apartheid. In the segregated township of Mitchell's Plain, a quiet panic began to spread. It started with a single missing child near a railway line, then another and another. Young boys lured from the periphery of train stations, their bodies later found in shallow graves, sodomized and strangled. This faceless killer would become known only by his terrifying nickname, the Station Strangler. Police struggled to connect the mounting death toll, over 20 boys in less than a decade. The investigation would be plagued by political upheaval, public outcry, and ultimately a single, disputed conviction. The trial of schoolteacher Norman Afzal Simons was supposed to bring closure. It did not. Today, the case remains a complex knot of fact, doubt, and a heartbreaking question. Is the man convicted of one murder the same phantom who claimed so many others? This is the chilling, unresolved legacy of the Station Strangler. The Cape Flats, 1986. A sprawling, windswept expanse of sand and community southeast of Cape Town's mountain-framed heart. It was a place of enforced segregation under apartheid, a place where poverty and systemic neglect had created a desperate reliance on the area's vital artery, the rail network. And it was here, on the edges of the train stations, that the nightmare began. The first body was discovered near the Heideveld station, then another and another. By the late 1980s, an alarming pattern had emerged. The victims were all young boys, mostly between the ages of 9 and 13. They were found buried in shallow, sandy graves, often face down with their hands bound. Their disappearance was always linked to the stations, the focal point of daily life in the townships of Mitchell's Plain and Eerste River. The modus operandi was horrifyingly consistent. The victims were sodomized and strangled. The media, fixated on the terrifying regularity of the murders and the common location of the attacks, gave the unknown killer a chilling nickname, the Station Strangler. In a community already burdened by the violence of apartheid, the loss of these children sent a shockwave of fear and desperation. Each boy who disappeared, names like Alino Sprinkle, Donovan Swartz, Neville Samai, left an irreplaceable void. They weren't statistics, they were children who were playing near the tracks, running errands, or simply returning from school. To understand the gravity of the case, you must understand the victims. Young boys from the Kuko community, marginalized and largely unprotected by a state apparatus, more concerned with racial control than community safety. The official number of victims eventually climbed to 22 boys, all believed to be the work of the same perpetrator between 1986 and 1994. Yet for years the murders went unsolved. Public pressure mounted, demanding answers from a police force that appeared either incapable or unwilling to dedicate the resources necessary for a massive manhunt in a non-white area. By the early 1990s, the Station Strangler cases had become a national trauma. The public was frantic, and the police investigation, long criticized as stagnant, was forced to ramp up. The investigative team began to profile the killer, relying on the scant evidence at the crime scenes. Key details from the shallow graves offered the only clues. The victims' clothing was often used as a garrote, sometimes their own underwear. In a few instances, bizarre, handwritten notes were left near the bodies, though their content and meaning were never fully disclosed, adding an unnerving theatrical element to the crimes. The manhunt was massive in scale, but hampered by a lack of forensic technology, and critics argued a systemic lack of priority given to cases involving children of color. It wasn't until the political tide shifted in South Africa that new resources were brought to bear. In the final year of the rampage, 1994, the police brought in a key asset, forensic psychologist and criminal profiler Mickey Pistorius. Pistorius, one of the pioneers of her field in South Africa, was instrumental in re-examining the case from a behavioral perspective. She analyzed the signature of the crimes, concluding the perpetrator was likely someone local, with a steady job, who projected a quiet, unremarkable exterior. He would have been highly controlled, sexually motivated, and someone who could easily approach young boys without arousing suspicion. The investigation was closing in, but not fast enough for the last recorded victim. In March 1994, Elroy Van Rooyen, a bright 10-year-old boy, disappeared. His body was found shortly thereafter. This murder, the last in the chilling series, provided investigators with the critical breakthrough they needed. Witnesses tied a specific individual to Elroy's disappearance. On April 19, 1994, police arrested Norman Afzal Simons, a seemingly respectable grade 5 schoolteacher from Mitchell's Plain. The community, already on edge, was stunned. Simons, a man known for his gentle demeanor, his intelligence, and his love of classical music, did not fit the sensationalized image of a monster. He was a local, respected figure. The media frenzy was immediate and overwhelming. Simons was instantly and universally labeled the Station Strangler. The assumption was that the police had finally caught the serial killer responsible for all 22 murders. Yet from the very beginning, a shadow of doubt was cast over the entirety of the case against him. Norman Simons appeared before the Cape Town Supreme Court in 1995. The world was watching, expecting a mass murder trial that would close the book on the decades-long nightmare. The actual trial, however, told a more complicated story. Despite the media's fervent attribution of all 22 murders, Simons was formally charged with only one count of murder and one count of kidnapping, that of the last victim, 10-year-old Elroy Van Rooyen. The prosecution's case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence and Simons' own contradictory statements. Key pieces of evidence included witness testimony, evidence connecting Simons to Elroy Van Rooyen on the day of his disappearance, the burial site, a shovel and a letter or part of a letter that the police claimed linked Simons to the shallow gravesite where Elroy's body was found. Simons' confession disputed a disputed admission made to the police. The defense, on the other hand, argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that the police had been under immense pressure to find a scapegoat for the serial murders. Simons maintained his innocence throughout the trial. After a 3-month-long trial, the court delivered its verdict. Norman Simons was convicted of the murder and kidnapping of Elroy Van Rooyen. He was sentenced to 35 years in prison, 25 years for murder, and 10 years for kidnapping. Crucially, the court did not find him guilty of the other 21 murders. The judge acknowledged the similarities in the cases, but stated there was insufficient evidence to convict Simons for the entire series of crimes. The verdict brought relief to some and deep, abiding pain to the families of the other 21 boys, whose cases remained officially unsolved. The conviction of Norman Simons, while satisfying the public's need for an arrest, failed to deliver true closure. The question that has haunted the Cape Flats for decades is this: was Norman Simons the single station strangler, or simply a murderer caught for the last of a series of crimes? In the decades following the trial, new forensic technology and developments in South Africa's legal system brought the case back into the spotlight, shining a harsh light on the original investigation. Inconsistencies and new evidence. First, there was a 2005 inquest into the other 21 murders. In 2008, a regional magistrate stated she believed there was prima facie evidence that Simons was likely responsible for at least 6 of the other deaths, but ruled out further prosecution due to the passage of time and evidence issues. Second, the most significant development came in 2010 when the police reopened the cold case. DNA samples that had been preserved from the original crime scenes, allegedly belonging to the serial killer, were reinvestigated. The result was a stunning development. The DNA found at the serial crime scenes did not match Norman Simons. This finding fundamentally destabilized the public and media narrative. If Simons was the Station Strangler, why did the forensic evidence from the serial cases exclude him? This led to a major competing theories. The single killer theory. Norman Simons was the Station Strangler. The DNA evidence was either contaminated, belonged to other individuals, or was not available for all 22 victims. His conviction for Elroy Van Rooyen's murder places him in the victim group's immediate vicinity. His advocates, however, strongly dispute the reliability of the original conviction itself. particularly concerning the disputed confessions. The multiple killer theory. As suggested by some crime profilers, the murders, while sharing a common location near the rail stations, may have been the work of more than one predator. The geographical and temporal spread of the attacks, coupled with the excluding DNA evidence, suggests the possibility of multiple offenders operating in the same vulnerable area and adopting a similar modus operandi of targeting young boys near transport hubs. This theory suggests the real Station Strangler, the man responsible for the bulk of the 22 murders, was never caught, and Simons was only responsible for the single murder he was convicted of, or perhaps none at all. The true crime story of the Station Strangler is inextricably linked to the socio-political climate of its time. The neglect of the case in its early stages is often cited as a clear example of how the violence against marginalized communities was deprioritized by the apartheid government and its security forces. The trauma left on the Cape Flats is a multi-generational scar. After serving 28 years of his sentence, Norman Siemens, the convicted murderer of Elroy Van Rooyen, became eligible for parole. The news of his potential release sparked a renewed wave of outrage and fear in the community. For the families of the 21 unsolved cases, his possible release felt like a final, cruel betrayal, a symbol that the state had given up on finding justice for their children. Simmons, still officially just the convicted killer of Elroy Van Rooyen, was granted parole in July 2023 and was released in November 2023. His release conditions include 24-hour monitoring and house arrest. This decision, though a product of the legal system, has left the community he once taught in deeply unsettled. The central tragic fact remains: while a man was convicted and served his time, the horrific serial murders that terrorized a community from 1986 to 1987, 1994 are still legally unsolved. The Station Strangler is a case of profound legal ambiguity, forensic failure, and a lasting human tragedy. It is a story of a community's struggle for justice against a killer, or perhaps killers, who preyed on the most vulnerable. We remember the boys, we remember their potential, and we are left with the silence of the cold case, a mystery echoing down the empty train tracks of the Cape Flats. If you found this investigation into South Africa's most enduring true crime mystery compelling, please consider subscribing for more in-depth analyses of solved and unsolved cases. If you would like to recommend a case I should cover, please leave it in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video.